And if people want to go ahead and introduce themselves in the chat, that's always good. I find that there's, sometimes ways that people make connections is through random calls of founders that are all living the same difficult journey. So go ahead, feel free to introduce who you are, what your startup is, and where you're based. And then, you might see other people that are kind of in a similar boat as you. And feel free to connect on LinkedIn as well. I find that always to be very fruitful. All right, let's go ahead and kick this off. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jonathan or Jonny Boyarsky, and I'm the managing director and founder of Literally Helping Startups. I'm a former founder myself, and we realized that there were not enough resources in the space to help founders. There were so many things out there, but a lot of them were charging crazy amounts and not providing real value. And we started this initiative to meet with founders, hear about what they're working on, and see if we can put them on a path towards an optimized chance of success. And so we create content, we meet directly with founders, provide plans to them to really just help them get on their way. And there's two other people that are going to be co-hosting this with me, and they are also kind of living similar journeys. We have Sawko of shipshape.vc, who runs a really cool AI-enhanced platform that really allows people to find investors. So Daniel, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, that'd be wonderful.
Hey, yeah, thanks, everyone. Great to see such a really good turnout. Yeah, some of you might know me. I'm Daniel Sawko. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a free-to-use investor search engine called shipshape.vc. It's semantically powered. I'll probably dive in. Actually, Jonny, do you want me to dive in now to how it works?
Yeah, if you want to, I think it might be better to do that kind of in the throughout the webinar, but we'll give you time to talk about the.
All right, very good. Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm going to drop my LinkedIn into the chat. I'm really passionate basically about opening up access for founders wherever they are in the world to be able to identify which investors are relevant to them in their business, because if you spend time with more of the relevant investors, you've got a higher chance of your business succeeding. Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah. Daniel is really generous with his time and just a really, really sharp guy when it comes to all things early stage startups. So yeah, he's a great person to connect with and follow. And then we're also joined by Eva of Block Dojo. She also is a real voice and a real thought leader in the space. And I find her to be one of those people that gives really candid and practical advice when it comes to early stage startups. I think there's a lot of people out there that like to pontificate, but every single time I see something from her on LinkedIn and every conversation I've had with her, I'm like, this is more honest than a lot of the VCs out there. So Eva, feel free to introduce yourself further.
Yeah, of course. So Eva Dobrzanska, I am the investment and deal flow manager at Block Dojo, which is an early stage blockchain incubator. So we help to grow, scale, and build the MVPs for the startups that we incubate over a 12 weeks long program, and then to connect with investors. And yeah, like Jonny mentioned, I'm always trying to push out a lot of content on LinkedIn as well. So if you want to look me up and connect with me, that is fantastic. And hopefully my content is useful, always trying to aim for that. And yeah, definitely here to talk about how to find the right investors, because I feel like that's my day-to-day question that I'm tackling myself as well.
Wonderful. So great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This is going to be mainly a discussion alongside some resources, and then we're going to do a little bit of like live demos about how to actually use these tools that are publicly available to find the right investors. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that off. But to start, we really like to kind of just, I'm going to give you a high level overview of what we're going to cover, and then we're going to kind of dive into this. So, and I'm going to go ahead and just, you should be able to see my screen now. We go full screen here. So the first thing that you want to do when you're a founder is actually, before you even start reaching out to anybody, is understand the investor mindset. The first process is really knowing how they think. And this is kind of a know your enemy in one sense. But they are the people that you want to invest in you. And they have very, very particular ways about going about investing. So the first thing you got to understand is that angel investors are investing their own money. VCs are usually investing other people's money. And this really influences the ways that they deploy capital. So most investors are going to have a very particular thesis around what they invest in. They're going to invest in specific verticals. This could be specific industries, this could be specific stages, and this could be specific geographies. There's also more recently a lot of funds out there that have begun investing in specific impact-driven theses, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Daniel, Eva, what are your sort of thoughts on how investors think about making investments and where their sort of frameworks are for kind of making these decisions?
Daniel, do you want to kick off first?
Okay, yeah, sure, no worries. Thanks, Eva. And I think a lot depends on, I think as you correctly pointed out, Jonny, the stage at which that these investors are investing. And if you think about angels, it's inherently a more personal relationship that you're striking up. And I mean, there are some angels that invested in ShipShape, especially early on, that were like, look, I don't know about the business, I don't know about the business model, but I believe in you. And I'm going to give you money because I believe in you, and I believe that you'll solve whatever problems are coming down the track. And I think it's just a very different way of pitching if you're a founder. If you're pitching to an angel versus a VC, where a VC is going to be, they've almost got their mental checklist of the types of criteria and like metrics that you need to hit in order for you to strike up like a proper conversation. Like VCs are social machines, and they can sort of tick box exercise whether or not they want a conversation on a probabilistic basis to go anywhere or not. And they're really good at navigating because they go through dozens of these conversations a week. So I think those are my sort of two top level snapshot inputs from both an angel and a VC investor standpoint.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points. I think that the best conversations you can have with angels isn't even always about the specifics of your business or everything that you're doing, but just connecting with them liking you as an individual. And then when you tell them about what they're building and they see your excitement for it, that's what they're going to premise their decision making on and their investment decision making on, which is almost counterintuitive. But the best meetings are just where you have like an organic, coffee or organic beer with someone, and they really, just like you. And I think that it's kind of weird because VCs are very much the other way, where they want to dive into the market size and they want to dive in the problem, the solution, and they're going to be pushing you and pressing you. And there's going to be a number of meetings, but it's really funny to contrast those two sort of perspectives.
And I think that also extrapolates itself on the stage of raising that you're in. So the earlier you go, pre-seed and seed, the more important the team and the founder becomes. So at Block Dojo, we look at the earliest of the stages. So even before a company has raised pre-seed, we are dealing with idea pre-MVP founders. And what we like to call it is a founder market fit. So we look at, does the founder have a relevant experience from the sector in which they're building? Do they have networks in it? Is there like a good personality and skills fit for the type of a business that they're building? Whereas for VCs who typically invest at the later stages, so we're talking late seed or Series A, Series B, that's when you are likely to be approaching product market fit. That's when you are likely to have some more tractions backing you up. And that's the basis on which VCs would be making the investment decisions, rather than just, the team is still important, naturally, but then you've got also the financial performance metrics that they will be looking at and scrutinizing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that the sort of like far end of that spectrum is the private equity kind of mindset that's very EBITDA driven. They're looking at more financials, and it kind of just exists on a perfect spectrum, from when you get the idea all the way to when you're doing millions of dollars in revenue. They're going to be focused on different things. And that's because, at the end of the day, they're making bets on you and at the earliest stages, and they're making bets on the company at the later stages.
With the metrics, I feel like if there is one metric that I would probably single out to be important at the earliest of stages as well, that would be probably LTV to CAC ratio. For the early stage startups, to consider how much it costs them to acquire a new customer and how much, value they will bring in, because this is very crucial for the forecasts as well, that every founder, even at the earliest of stages, needs to make in advance. And the sooner they understand their forecast, that shows business acumen, that shows good understanding of the market, and that is what those early stage investors want to know, that you know how to do that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And that really spans across, type of business. If you're going after individual consumers, they're still worried about how much it costs to, acquire a user. If you're going after B2B enterprise SaaS, they're still interested to know how much are you spending to get those clients. So I think that's an excellent point.
And yeah, actually, as someone who's living this problem now, I think very often as a founder, you don't know where to start in terms of measuring this, because you've got so many potential channels into your funnel, and knowing how much they each cost, it can be a really difficult thing to do and predict, because you might go to an event and that might be where there are some customers. How do you put a number on that? But yeah. Honestly, I would just say, even if you don't know where to start somewhere and then build out from there, because as soon as an investor sees that you're measuring something, that changes the way that they perceive you. Because I think, to your point, Eva, as well, I think you're 100% right on that. Early on, they're assessing your ability to build the infrastructure, whereas later on, they're measuring the infrastructure that you've built.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really elegant way of putting it. Well said. Wonderful. So, a couple books that I recommend is The Secrets of Sand Hill Road and Venture Deals. These are two books that really talk a lot more about the founder mindset and the VC mindset, and just kind of the back and forth of understanding sort of how VCs look at founders and how angels look at founders. So those are some great pieces to kind of further develop your understanding of investors. But now that we've kind of set the stage for understanding investors, it's important to know, as I said, that they all focus on, at least most of them, a specific geography, industry, stage, and sometimes an impact specific or founder specific sort of thesis. The reason that this is so important is because this is the way that you're going to find the right investor. So now let's start talking about how we can define your company so that you can then find the right investors. I'm going to go ahead and just go over to this little slide deck that I made. Go full screen. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is characterize your startup in terms of industry, location, stage, and then anything founder specific. At the industry, this is going to be the most important way to characterize your startup, and usually the sort of best inroad for finding a VC or an angel. So there are lots of ways to sort of define industry. At the highest level, this can be something like B2B or B2C or marketplace or B2G. There are sometimes funds and angels who say, I only invest in B2B companies and I only invest in B2B SaaS. And if that's the case and you're a B2C company, there's no reason to really reach out. It's very rare that you can pull somebody away from their thesis. So make sure that you really think critically about the high level of your industry all the way down to the low level. And this is something specific like fintech, prop tech, health tech, AI, ML. And note, I have seen this more recently where sometimes the waves and the macro trends kind of influence startups to try to fit into something that they aren't. So if you're not an AI company, just because everybody's investing in AI, don't try to now paint your company as an AI company. Investors will read through this, they will know, and then the meeting, you might get the meeting, but it will be a waste because they're never going to cut you a check. So make sure that you're really open and honest about what kind of company you're building so that when you go to pitch investors, they can say, this is exactly in my thesis. That being said, there is sometimes that certain funds, they might say something like fintech, and maybe you touch real estate, but there's a financial component that's very legitimate. So try to get a gauge on how specific their thesis is. Eva, thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I was literally just looking at this slide, which I really, really like. And one thing that I would comment on this one is this is something that I so often see lacking in early stage pitch decks, where you do not have this elevator statement, as I call it, about what your startup actually is. And I think this is crucial to include it. And, looking at the 4 columns that you've included on the slide, an example would be, we are a female-led London-based B2B PropTech marketplace, currently post-launch and approaching revenue generation point later this year, raising 1 million seed. If you can have that statement on your first slide in your pitch deck, that is fantastic. And it also makes the job of an investor so much easier. I think the average stat is that an average investor looks for about 2.5 minutes or maybe 3 minutes on a pitch deck. So you really need to ensure that you catch their attention and make it worth their while. And to build on the other thing that you said with targeting, I think one of the main problems in the industry is the problem of information asymmetry between the VCs and founders. So despite a VC fund's website saying that, let's say, they invest in seed level startups in climate tech and energy, and something else that you could see on their website is, let's say, 15 startups on their portfolio page, somewhat in those sectors. But what the website won't tell you is how much capital that VC has got left over that can be deployed, how much time has gone since their last investment, and also whether they are currently actively investing or not. I was jumping on some calls with VCs to learn about their thesis, and some would, for example, tell me, oh, actually, we are on an investing freeze until the end of this year. So there's a lot of factors that are either internal to the VC fund or related to the external markets that have nothing to do with your startup, but nonetheless will still impact whether or not you will get funding or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great point. And what you said about that 1 sentence snapshot, the way you said that,
I'm gonna put it in the chat, actually.
You should, because everyone should have that, because the amount of times that I ask people to give a summary of their startup, it gets long-winded, doesn't answer the questions that people care about. That is just such an elegant way to say that. And that honestly is probably, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but that is probably the best LinkedIn message that you can have, because it tells them exactly what they need to know to make a decision. And if you hit all of those, things are going to go, very well, if that is their industry, location, and stage. And also feel free to put questions in the chat, and if they're relevant to what we're talking about right now, we'll answer them. So yeah, that's another great thing. Wonderful. I think that was a great lead in to the next point, which is location. This is one of the least malleable and least flexible sort of points and investment verticals and theses that people just really won't go around. If you are based in the US and you are talking to a fund that only invests in Europe, it is going to be very difficult. And one of the questions I almost always get as the follow-up is, well, how do I know where I'm based? I've got a Delaware C Corp, but the team is in London and I've got a tech team in Ukraine or India or Latin America, and we've got customers in Africa and across Asia. So what I normally say is that the 2 things that people are gonna mainly look at is where you have a presence in terms of customer base and where the team is and where the team is building, and the core team. So we're talking about the C-suite. I usually say, in order for you to have a presence in the US, because you'll see this language sometimes with funds, they'll say, we only invest in companies that have a presence in Canada or a presence in the US. I say you should have at least 30% of your client or user base there. It's kind of a rough estimate of saying that you have a legitimate presence. So that's one thing to think about. Okay, so that's location. And again, on both the industry and location and stage, there's going to be lots of ways to define it, but location can be really high level. This can be continent based. So there are some funds and angels that only invest in, America or North America more generally, or Europe or Africa. And then it can get, region specific, West Africa, Latin America. It can get country specific. It can get region, state, or province specific, and it can get city specific. And the more specific you get, the better. So if you're going after, an investor that only invests in Los Angeles and you're based in Los Angeles, well, now you've cut out everybody that isn't based in LA, and you have to fight far fewer people. So the more specific you can get, the better. And you're going to play around with these parameters as we go to sort of the searching part of this presentation. Any kind of thoughts, Daniel? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's really solid advice in terms of you want to be able to defend your saying that you've got a presence somewhere, and so having an idea of like what center of gravity you've got in a location, I think is really really helpful. And you've got I think there's one caveat I would add to this is if you've got a great relationship with an investor or you can feel chemistry building with an investor, very often they'll look for reasons to include you in whatever parameters and requirements they've got. So they'll say, right, you might not be based in the US right now, but as part of the deal, we could ensure that you set up like a Delaware sort of corporation. And that way we can tick that box because you might be required as a fund to only have investments in US-based entities. But actually, it's a really common way, especially if you're coming from Europe to the US. US VCs will know that you don't necessarily have a legal structure set up in the US, but as part of the investment, they'll look at doing that. And I mean, for us, one of the things that makes me really excited about our own journey is already like probably just over 15% of our user base is in the US. That's happened organically, and we're planning to raise in the US. And that, so having that knowledge of where our user base is coming from actually is helping to direct where we're thinking about taking the business anyway, because you're in many ways letting the natural progress of the business direct your own preferential location and centers of gravity.
Yeah.
And where you raise money from.
And I think too that everybody knows it's so hard to get even a single person to pay you for your service or even use your app. And so there was one gaming platform, like gaming community platform that I was speaking with. They had like 800,000 daily active users, and nearly half of them were based in the Philippines because nothing existed there. And they weren't even going after that market. This was a Norwegian company. And so I think that's a really great point of like, sometimes you have an idea of product market fit or the problem you're solving, but you might not know where that is exactly. And so let that kind of naturally occur, because the more users, the better. And that will really help you direct to the way you sort of go about building your product and kind of defining that go-to-market strategy. Excellent. So the next thing is stage. There's really two ways to define your company's stage, and that's either by the product or by the round. And a lot of VCs and a lot of investors will use some of these terms interchangeably. But in general, when we talk about product, we can talk about the idea phase, we can talk about the pre-product phase, we can talk about the MVP stage, and then we can talk about the launch phase, and then we can talk about the revenue generating kind of scaling phase. So that's what you'll hear about in terms of product. A lot of VCs and angels will kind of put that somewhere in their LinkedIn or on their fund website where it'll say we only invest in post-product or post-MVP. So pay attention to that because it's really important. The other way to do this is through fundraising stages. We've got pre-seed, seed, and then series A, B, C, D. So pay attention to that. The only other thing that I often see is sometimes you'll have revenue requirements. I know a lot of funds will say we only invest in companies with at least $1 million or more of revenue. We only invest with companies with at least 100K in revenue. So pay attention to that as well. Sometimes though, if you get a meeting with, let's say, a seed or series A company and maybe your pre-seed or seed, it's good to still take that meeting and then ask them to define what metrics, what traction metrics they require, and then keep them updated as you get close. So if you're talking to an investor, they like the idea, they invest in your region, they invest in your industry, and they say, you're a little bit too early for us. Ask them, say, hey, what would I have to get to in terms of traction in order for you to invest? And they might tell you, listen, you get to 100,000 users, daily active users, we'll invest. You get to $500,000 in revenue, we'll invest. And then what you do is you put them on an investor list and you update them so that once you start to get close, you reach back out. This can be a really, really important way to create strong relationships, plant the seed early in their head to, plant the seed that you're going to be the one to grow, and then kind of continually update them so that they are like, wow, that company has really been growing. And then once you get close to that metric that they want, they'll be very, very excited to take that meeting with you.
Also on the topic of revenue generating, one of the VCs from my network that I was speaking to, they told me this insight that when they look at revenues and revenue forecasts, they look at the numbers, but they also look at and assess the revenue quality. So what this means is that is your revenue coming from clients that are locked in for a number of years? Do you have like a high percentage of repeat purchases, high retention rates, and by conversion, low churn? And then they would also like ask you potentially about your ability to upsell to existing customers rather than acquiring new ones, because that would be generally cheaper to upsell to existing customers. So that's also super, super important to consider when you're talking, we're revenue generating, this is how much ARR we've got, but think about the quality. I've seen the instances as well where 80% of the total revenue would be coming from 20% of the customers. So this is more high risk. And, especially at those later stages, so late seed, Series A, VCs will be really drilling down to that level to assess that.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think that was really well summarized. The term that people will sort of use to describe that is customer or client stickiness. And this is all of those things: no churn, upsellability, repurchase rate. So pay attention to all of that, because that is something that VCs will dive into. One of the other things too, if you are in B2B and you have less than 50 clients, you have to make sure that people aren't leaving because they don't like the product. Some companies might fail. You might have some people that realize it's not, exactly what they want, but as much as you can, retain those early clients, because churn at the earliest stages is one of the worst things that you could have. Really great point, Eva. Wonderful. So the last sort of characteristic of your startup is going to be the founder-specific characteristics. And we've seen a lot of funds in the past, I would say 3 to 5 years pop up that want to support Black founders, female founders. I've even seen funds that want to support veteran founders, immigrant founders, and even religious founders. So pay attention. If there are any people in your region that like to support these kinds of founders specifically, it can often be a really, really easy way to get a meeting because they want to support that community. And then one of the other things that sort of fits somewhere between industry and founder is sort of impact. So if your company has a climate play, sort of a good nature to it, that's something else that investors will look at. And the idea is exactly what Eva said, which is you want to just have an investor who's only looking for your specific. So Eva, give that little spiel again about that company. I think that you said that perfectly.
The previous one that I put in the chat?
Yeah. It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me just open my notes. I've got so many on my Notion. There we go. We are a female-led, London-based B2B PropTech marketplace, currently post-launch and approaching revenue generation point later this year, raising 1 million seed.
Perfect. And if you want to throw in there a traction metric, I think that that's something else that can also be a really cool thing when you're defining that. So we have, 2,000 users or 10 paying clients or something like that. Wonderful. I'm going to sort of pause right here. Does anybody have any questions about characterizing your startup? If you want to put it in the chat, go for it.
Just going to chip in here, Jonny, and I think just building on Eva's point as well, like what you're really trying to do is show that what you're doing is aligned with whoever that investor is and what their interests are, because every single piece that's on screen right now is like we're ticking a box for you. And I'd describe investor interests are a bit like each individual's YouTube interests. Like everyone watches something different on YouTube, and YouTube's great because it helps you identify like really long tail niche things that you're interested in that maybe no one else is. And you're trying to basically hit that same point for investors, because everyone knows it's really difficult to find investors that are like, oh my God, you're into this as well. That's great. But that's exactly what you're trying to do with every single one of these parameters here and the characteristics of your startup.
I think that's an excellent point. And one last thing, don't try to find, you should try to find all four, but you're probably not going to you're going to be successful in finding all four. So if you can find 1, 2, or 3, these are all going to be really helpful. Wonderful. So that's the first part. You guys, everybody on the call should be thinking about their startup in these sort of characteristics. Now let's get into the part that you're probably all looking for, which is how do we find these people? Honestly, LinkedIn and Google are very, very powerful tools. The weird thing, Google's actually better at searching on LinkedIn than LinkedIn is for searching on LinkedIn. So what you're going to do is you're going to take these terms, and I'm going to do a live demo right now on how to do this. And yeah, I'm going to just show you guys how to walk through this. So you go ahead and you say, all right, I am an ag tech based seed stage startup in, let's say, California. And so these are the, we've got industry, we've got stage, and we've got location. And then I like to put investor in there. You can try venture capital. And then I like to put LinkedIn, and you just hit enter and you see people who are investing in all of these kinds of companies. And you get really good at just scrolling through all of these people. So, and then you want to read their LinkedIn to see if they're a good fit for you. So angel investor, operator, advisor, maker, passionate about sustainable food, angel investing in food tech startups, plant, biofermentation, clean meat, ethical food logistics. If you're at the idea stage, pre-seed, or seed, drop me a line. So this is a person that is ag tech. They are angel investing. They invest at the earliest stages. This is like one of your ideal founders. So what I normally like to do before you just start really reaching out, see if you have any connections and just put them on a list of A, B, and C startup or A, B, and C investors. So the A investors are going to be the one who have as many as possible. So, and yeah, Nathan's got a farm tech startup, and he is properly called out. I actually did have you in mind for this one. So you want to find somebody with all three, and if they have all three, that's your A-list investor. If they have two or one but seem like a good fit, those are your B-list investors. And then if they have maybe one or a general fund, those are your C-list investors. And we'll talk about what to do with that list in a sec. Add him, go on to the next one. So an attorney, but he's a seed investor, investable in sustainable food and agriculture, based in California. Not a lot of connections, which is actually a good sign. You could probably reach out to him a little bit easier. Good person to note. And then you just keep going through this. Head of investor relations. Let's see what he does. Investor relations for Grub Market. But he's also still a venture partner at Scrum Ventures. And he's got a podcast. So he, and then you can read to see if he's angel investing or cutting checks right now. Some of the people that he's invested in. All right, Aaron, agri-food operations strategist, implementation. You can see they'll usually say somewhere in their description that they're an investor. Rob Leclerc, ag funder. Great. So after kind of going through maybe the first 30 or so investors, the next thing that you can do is play around with the parameters. So maybe instead of wanting to just do ag tech specific, maybe that's too specific. You go ahead and do sustainable, investors. And instead of putting, investor twice, we'll do something like VC or fund. And then now we're going to get a bunch of funds. And so here's how we find the funds. And you can also play around. Maybe you don't do California, you do US instead. Maybe you don't do seed, you do, MVP or something like, revenue generating. Put some sort of word in there. And then you can see other people that are specifically focused on this. When you find a fund, what you want to normally do is go and look at the employees and start to get an idea of who might be the easiest to get an intro to. See if you have any secondary connections. So if I really want an introduction to Neil, I might go ahead and say, okay, well, who am I connected with? Go to the people that I'm connected with and say, well, I spoke to Ryan last week. I'll see if Ryan can introduce me. Then you go to the other people at the fund and you say, okay, maybe I know somebody closer to Ilana. And I say, okay, is there somebody, do I know Dan better than I know Ryan? And you start to sort of triage in your head who will be the best person to introduce you to these people. So keep that back of mind as you start to do this. I'm going to kind of just pause here. Eva, Daniel, any thoughts on sort of some of these things that I'm doing?
A couple, definitely a couple of them. So firstly, I think it wouldn't be 2023 if ChatGPT was not mentioned, because so I've tested it out, and what you've put there into Google is also a fantastic prompt for ChatGPT, because you could basically ask it, like, give me a list of 100 names of VC funds who invest at the early stages in climate tech across the US. Let's say that. The only caveat with that is that obviously you still have to then manually go on those funds' website, do your research, do the work, look them up on LinkedIn and so on. You're not going to escape this. That's something that needs to be done. Lots of tools to speed up the process, and I'll let Daniel talk more on that. From me, one more that I would probably add is that there is so many free investor lists and databases out there in the internet. A lot of them on Google Sheets, a lot of them on Airtable. They are usually circulated around LinkedIn. But then if you wanted to find them online, I think they could be just searched on Google as well. If you type in Airtable list of investors, there's so many of them. But yeah, I'll pass on to Dan next.
Yeah, wonderful.
You're muted, Dan.
Daniel, oh, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Classic. It had to happen. Yeah, LinkedIn and Google really are great friends for this, and Twitter as well. I would say is a really good sort of channel to be looking at. And ultimately, what we decided to build at shipshape.vc is based upon the fact that you can search these channels, but at the moment they're really disparate, and lots of the algorithms that are used on each one of these sort of like forms of social media or web searching, the algorithms like prioritize really fresh content. So on LinkedIn, you won't see posts that are like older than a week, and that means that all of the value that someone might have given like a month ago has kind of been lost to the users. And I think, Jonny, as you highlighted, like LinkedIn's search bar is absolutely terrible. It really doesn't like you finding things. It likes being in control of what you can find. But yeah, like that's kind of, I'm going to sort of segue in here, Jonny, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think this is a great time. So Google, LinkedIn, as Daniel said, powerful, but people realize that it's actually a pain to do that. And not every single time do we want to be, spending 5 hours a day just using Google and LinkedIn to compile lists manually. So this is a perfect lead in. There are tools out there and people have experienced this before. So Daniel, I'm going to let you take it away and talk about what you do at ShipShape.
Cheers, Jonny. Yeah, and actually did this the entire business was born out of frustration in a previous startup that I was working in. And the startup was trying to automate FATCA compliance for large banks. So anyone that's had to fill out like is it W-9, I think, if you're a US citizen, yep, or like if you're a non-US citizen, like a W-8, like it's an absolute nightmare. So trying to find investors though that were interested in that was really difficult. And so we decided to create ShipShape, which basically aggregates investor content. And I mean, we can let's run like a more relevant like example. So what have I found in here? So yeah, Stefano, we can go with yours, and we can go and type in financial literacy. And what the search engine will do is it will identify which investors are talking about this topic. So we'll open this up, and we can see that this investment firm is talking about this particular topic. And so, yeah, you can type in exactly what it is that your business is doing. You get really specific, really precise, and it will find which investors are in that space. It will also include, see these red buttons here? Those are portfolio companies that they've invested in. And these portfolio companies are doing something to do with financial literacy, or they're mentioning that in their content. We also will incorporate the individuals as well that are talking about this being a problem. So like David at Great Point Ventures is talking about financial literacy and the importance of this. So this is like, yeah, this is what we built this for, is to save that time. But at the moment, I think, as Eva pointed out, you've got all these spreadsheets flying around on LinkedIn. You've got, and it's great because you've got this amazing long list, right? Of thousands of investors that you can potentially reach out to. But it's a false economy because you actually want to find as short a list as possible to invest the most amount of time into. So what we've done here, yeah, by incorporating that, you've actually got a really good way of going to speak with this person too, because we can go to Twitter, we can sort of start a conversation with David about this, saying, hey, we're doing something in this space too. We've got something to contribute to this conversation. You can also look through portfolio companies. So who has invested in each one of these, and you can see, all right, who do I potentially want to go and speak with? Like that's the way that we've built this. So it's free to use. It's paid for because marketers pay to get in front of the startups that are using it. So you see that's the top here. Like there's a law firm that sponsors an ad, and they basically want to start doing more with startups. They're actually our lawyers. They're brilliant, but it's good to have that.
What I love, Dan, what I love about your search is that obviously, as we could see, there was one bit from the Medium article, one from Twitter, and so on, which can also guide founders' decisions on which platform to use to reach out to those investors. If you've got an investor tweeting on Twitter, reply to their tweet, start a conversation, and then send them a message or connect and so on. If they're posting on LinkedIn, do the same thing on LinkedIn. And I think this is really good for fostering those natural, organic relationships that later on make it so much more easier to start a conversation about actual investment.
I 100% agree. And we've actually used this ourselves to raise. So
Nice.
we typed in data science in venture capital, and we found an individual who has actually since moved to a US VC fund, who's the director of data science. And he individually invested in us off the back of us finding him and starting a conversation about data science and venture
That's
capital.
amazing. Did you tell him that you found him using your own product?
Yeah, let me see if I can load up that message. I'll probably bring it up later on in this, but I'll find that message and I'll share it with you. But yeah, the hook was basically we used our own search engine to find that you were interested in data science in VC.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, you guys really, I'm being genuine. ShipShape is great. They have a little bit of a London and Europe focus, but it is expanding rapidly. And like you said, you got 15% of users from the US. And I think too that this is where like AI and data are going to be really helpful to people. Like scraping other sites makes your life so much easier. I do want to not to highlight too many of your competitors, but I'll show the pros and cons of each of the other ones as well. I also have a list of other things. So other than ShipShape, which is great, we've got Signal.nfx. So this has kind of a similar platform, but to Daniel's point, one of my biggest critiques of Signal is that it's not always up to date. So you will sometimes find sort of outdated data. You don't always know who's actively writing checks, but you can go in here and say, I am a cybersecurity based in Asia, and there aren't that many, I guess. Or based in LA and Southern California, and I'm looking for a check between 50 and 250K. This will come up with a list of people, but it's again a really great place to maybe find the people. I would then put their name into ShipShape, put their name into LinkedIn, find them somewhere else. So that's one. Another is openvc.app. Very similar. You select stage, round size, company. They do some great stuff. So you could say, Web3, and we're based in United, and I think it's just USA. Go ahead, click this, and then we're at the early revenue / scaling, and we're looking for $1 million.
And probably worth noting here that this is for free, but I think there's also a premium version for OpenVC that gives you even more filters to narrow down even further on this search.
Yeah, exactly. And they also sometimes have ways for you to submit decks, and they also have ways for you to get intros.
Yeah.
Those work sometimes decently well. So those are definitely things to consider if you can't find a warm intro. You've also got things like the Midas list from Forbes. Everything that touches turns to gold. These are investors that are known. If you find a premium VC, though, it usually means that they're harder to get intros to. Then you could just search something like best health tech venture investors, and you could get lists. These are the first 3 links. So, typical first round activity, how responsive they are, et cetera. You've got top 10 health tech, and you can say top health tech in Latin America, in Asia, et cetera, and just go through all those. And then one other site that I want to point out, and I know Matt Sherman over here, he's a pretty interesting guy. He's got a kind of similar thing of investors who are looking for companies and companies that are looking for investors. There is a little bit of a paid tier for subscription to get intros, but it's pretty interesting that they've got all of this as well. Eva, go ahead.
Sorry, I wasn't raising a hand, but there is a thing I would say. One other strategy that is pretty good as well is to identify, if you can identify your not just competitors, but also startups in your sector that are much further ahead, or maybe even who went public, exited, and so on. And you could look up their fundraising history on Crunchbase or somewhere on Google and so on, and you can see which investors invested in them. That is a good starting point for you to have a think like, oh, okay, that could be my targets as well. And then one more side note that I would add is that for every investor that you speak to, when you actually get into a meeting, even if that's not a perfect fit for them, always ask them, oh, do you know anyone that I should speak to?
Yeah.
Can you recommend anyone for me to talk to? Because that will probably be one of the best sources of information. VCs talk to each other, VCs co-invest alongside each other. It is a tight and close-knit group of actors in that ecosystem. So always ask for like this next link to someone new.
Yeah, and especially if the reason that they say they're not interested is because you're too early and they like your company, they like the industry that you're in, they think you're solving a real problem. That is the best time to say, hey, is there anybody you know that invests at our stage or that might be interested?
I was literally speaking to one of my friends who works for a Series A level VC, and I was asking her, how do you do outbound? Like, how do you scout for startups? And she says to me, like, oh, I don't. We get referrals only from other VCs. All that we get is introductions inbound, mostly from other VCs.
Yeah, no, it's insane. I was talking to a fund as well, a smaller fund, $25 million, and they said they don't invest in cold outreaches. And like some people do that. I personally not a fan of that kind of thesis, but there are some people out there. So this leads perfectly to the next step. And I saw a question about this from Tony, which is, how do we reach out? What do we do? So the first thing that I say is the best thing you can do is be born to parents who work in VC. That way you should be able to get a meeting really easily. For those of you that maybe didn't pick up on it, that's a joke. Obviously, most of us don't have parents in VC. But in all honesty, the best connection is a personal connection. It's even stronger than a professional connection. Because a personal, they're willing to put their name on the line. And your network might be stronger than you think. So go through your own network, see if there's anybody in VC. But if you have a personal connection, they'll get a warm intro. If you have a professional connection, if you know somebody that works at this VC, or if you know somebody that knows somebody that works at this VC, that's also going to be the best way to get an intro. It's better than anything else you can think of. If you don't have a personal or professional connection, my next best suggestion is try to create one. And there are mainly 2 or 3 ways to do this. The first of which, go to their portfolio, go to the VC fund's portfolio, or even the angel's portfolio. Reach out to a company that they've invested in the last 2 to 3 years that's ideally in your industry. Reach out to the founder, shoot them a nice little message and say, hey, I'm a founder in your space. I'd love to talk to you about what you're building and tell you about what I'm building, get some tips about scalability, maybe even intro them to some of your clients if you think that their company could be helpful. Do something to kind of show, good faith and that you're trying to help them. And then just ask questions about that investor. Say, hey, I saw that you got investment from one of the investors that's on our list. I was curious to know, how did you get that intro? How did you find them? And they might tell you one of 2 things. They might say, oh, let me introduce you. I'd love to. Or they might say, hey, they do cold outreach. So just submit your pitch to their site and they'll respond. Or they might tell you to screw off. But it's one way that you can sort of create a warm intro. The other, and I don't think founders do this enough, go to events in your city and in your state. Go to, cocktail hours hosted by law firms. Go to places where people are gathering in the tech scene. Go to an investment, talk about AI. Just show up to places where investors will be and strike up conversations sort of naturally as possible. If you don't have any of those things, cold outreach can work. You will need to be persistent. You will need to be very tactful. And this is where I gotta say, most founders send awful first LinkedIn messages. I have seen all caps. I have seen people telling me that they're going to be the next unicorn. I have seen people telling me I'd be stupid not to invest in them. There are so many things that people do, but honestly, the best message that you can send it both via LinkedIn and via email if you can find it. And those investor lists that you mentioned are great places to find emails. But you want to just send a short explanation of your company, all of those things that we mentioned earlier, and how it fits their thesis, and then one traction metric. Send that in the first message. I recommend not sending a pitch deck or one pager, because that will just bring them closer to, just saying like, all right, I'm out. Or they look at your pitch deck and say, no, thanks. And it's a way for them to almost look at it, but not really. And so you go in there, you do all these things, and then send a follow-up via email with an additional traction metric, and send a follow-up via LinkedIn. Sometimes you can do 3. And if you really think that you're a good fit for them, do that. But comment and engage on their tweets, their LinkedIn posts, everything that you can do is sort of get your name sort of continually finding, popping to the top of their screen. Do you guys have any sort of thoughts or suggestions on that cold outreach strategy?
I was just following what was happening in the chat, and I really like what Jake said as well. Follow up. Like, so many founders do not follow up, and chances are they might be a good fit, but as I said earlier, it might be bad timing. So it is very much in founders' interest to keep that conversation going. And I agree with the statement that cold outreach, when done properly, works. I think that factor of being done properly is just the research that you got to do beforehand. If you can also showcase if there are any synergies between you and the other portfolio companies in a VC's portfolio, that's also a plus. And let's say, the VC investor, let's say they are based in Tel Aviv and you are currently in the process of expanding to Tel Aviv. Even better. It's that strategic overlap that you want to showcase. You've got as much of it as possible.
And I think just to dovetail pretty neatly, and I found the message.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Yeah. So I think this touches upon, and by the way, this is quite a couple of years ago. I probably would have reached out differently now, but this is kind of, it gives you an idea of the type of message that might work with someone. So in this instance, we were using our own search engine to reach out to Francesco, who's now director of data science over at Greycroft. And his first response was like, hey, great message, because we'd done our research, we knew who he was, we knew why he'd be interested. And that for him was enough of a hook to open up that conversation.
I love that message. I was just reading. I absolutely love it.
Also, to add on to this in a similar sense, I recently I found somebody that was an impact angel investor on LinkedIn, shot him a LinkedIn message and said, hey, we're building this initiative that helps startups for free. I know that you really care about this. Would love to, talk to you more. He was like, send your materials to my email, drafted up an email, send it to him. And while on this call, he just got back to me and said, I love what you're building. I'm in this space. Here's all the ways that I might be able to help. And so if you start off by being really passionate about what you're doing and not trying to sell them and not trying to get their money, that's when their interest will naturally grow. And the way to think about this framework is actually the second that you ask for investment, they get defensive and want to find a reason not to invest. But the second you tell them about what you're building, now they want to get interest. And that's a mental psychology piece that you just can't get around. And so you'd rather them be so interested in so believing of you and what you're building that they want to get involved as much as they can. That's when the money and the checkbook comes out, instead of saying hey, I want, $50,000 to build this app and blah, 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 blah. So wonderful. We're kind of, exactly, Daniel. We're kind of getting to the end here. The last thing I want to do, I'm very passionate about this, is you have to research the people in the firm. You both want to do this before you cold reach out, but also after you do this. Check their LinkedIn, Google their name, find their fund website, and then search their name in the news. I want to go through this first as fast as I can. Frank Rotman, QED Investors, really interesting fintech guy. All right, we found 3 things. We found his LinkedIn. You're going to go to that. You're going to find out what his description is. You're going to see if you can talk to somebody that knows him. This is the best way before an investor meeting to get an idea of what's going on in their head. I've got almost 42 connections with him. I'd reach out to the ones that were the strongest, say, hey, do you know Frank? What's he been thinking as of late? You can also get an idea from their LinkedIn posts. Check out their posts, check out their history. This guy was at Capital One for almost 12 years, so he knows a lot about credit. You don't need to over-explain how credit works if you're a fintech startup. Then he jumped to another startup, and then he's been doing this for 15 years. They have multiple unicorns in their portfolio, so they are really good at this and have been doing this for a long time. Then go to their fund website. Check out what people have to say about them. What's wonderful about these guys is that they show you what the active investments are. Check them all out. Reach out to a founder of a portfolio company. Say, hey, how did your pitch go? Is there anything I should know about? They might be able to give you some ideas. He also posts about this. He wrote this article about why they invested in Hello Alice, which is a lending startup. If you don't read this article and you're a lending startup, I don't even think that you're deserving of getting the money. You have to find this out there. You have to do that. Lastly, check their Twitter, see what they're talking about, see what he's really, gets him going. The other thing too here, Frank likes crypto. If you think crypto is the dumbest thing in the world and your company's sort of adjacent and you go into the meeting and saying, everybody that invests in crypto is a moron, well, guess what? He's probably not going to invest. So make sure that you navigate those conversations with humility and make sure that you understand what his perspective is. And then lastly, and arguably most importantly, find their name, search the word pitch, and see if they've written anything about pitching. Frank wrote 2 years ago a literal playbook on how to pitch him. If you don't find this, you're probably not going to get a second meeting. First thing he says, research the firm. Simple statements that show you've done your research matter. So I watched your panel about XYZ. The best pitches are fluid, right? So this is how Frank views pitching. If you don't find this, you come out really choppy. You might do something he doesn't like. So you have to find this. I think that this thread is really solid more generally, so I'm going to put it in the chat. Realize that was a whirlwind of due diligence.
I love this, but it really goes to show, it is time consuming and it will take the time. But if you take this time and really nail it down and that results in 100K investment, then you're sorted.
Exactly. Exactly. And every single time, you don't have to be doing all of this for every cold outreach. Tools like Daniel's help a lot. ShipShape helps a lot. But you should be doing this for the ones that you have meetings with. Because this is the way that you're going to have everything buttoned up, everything good to go before you go ahead and pitch them. That was a whirlwind of a talk. I feel like there was a lot of really great pieces of information. I think that you guys both really speak elegantly about this topic. So really well done. I do want to leave, if you guys have any closing thoughts or are there any questions, again, this is going to be recorded. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Is there anything sort of last you want to say before we kind of, bid adieu?
Eva, do you want to go first?
No, I think that's everything. I'm still digesting it all myself. And, Dan, Jonny, everything that you said, I personally love it as well. I think my main also to leave a tip here would be basically for founders to put themselves out there. That can also be in terms of their own presence. So investor update emails, incredible. Always send them out, keep the conversation going. LinkedIn posting, obviously I'm a huge fan myself. Put yourself out there and show to the investors that you yourself are excited about what you're building. Yeah,
I think that's a great point. Daniel, any sort of parting thoughts?
Oh, I mean, just a second, Eva. I've learned a lot from both of you today in terms of the way that you're approaching this, the way that you're thinking about it. It's been awesome. Some great questions too in the chat. Feel free to reach out as well on LinkedIn if you've got any further follow-up questions. Really happy to help. And I suppose last thing, which I suppose an ask, which is if you're part of a founder community or group, and you think that what you've seen from us and ShipShape today could be helpful to any founders raising in there, please do share us. yeah, that would be very much appreciated. Our marketing budget is about $100 a month. So like we rely on word of mouth, and I've been taking lessons from Eva on LinkedIn posting, which is really helpful. But yeah, word of mouth always helps.
Wonderful. I'll just probably quickly plug Block Dojo as well. So for any founders out here that might be watching this who are at the idea or early MVP stages and they are using blockchain as technology, we are running an incubator and we are currently accepting applications for the incubator as well. So the link to apply is on my LinkedIn profile. And then also one of the pinned posts in the featured section on my profile outlines everything that we offer in the incubator. So yeah, feel free to visit, check it out if it's good for you as well.
Wonderful. And I just want to say too, there are a lot of people out there in the startup space that are sort of talking and pontificating. And as somebody that's in this space a lot, I think both Daniel and Eva here are really incredible people. And they are the most forthright among them. I'd say they're in the top 10% of honest feedback. There's going to be a lot of VCs and angels out there that don't fully get the full breadth of the ecosystem. So they're great people to follow. And then lastly, just to plug what Rob and I are doing, Robert McIntosh, my co-founder, we started literally helping startups because we realized that this journey is difficult and we wanted to make it a lot easier. We will meet with any founder that goes to our website or reaches out to us, hear what they're working on. And one of the things, if you want to practice this whole process, you can shoot us a message on LinkedIn. We do this kind of investor gauntlet type thing where we have you reach out as though we're investors and walk through every single part of this, of what you're sending in your emails, and then pitching so that you can do that. And lastly, I just want to say that all of these are really great tools, but none of this replaces building your business. So make sure that you are doing all the things in terms of product building, going to market, and traction that you can, so that this really goes well. I think that a lot of people end up doing all of these things, but they're not building their business at the same time, and then they're really disappointed when investors aren't really interested or playing a role. But thank you so much for attending. Daniel, Eva, your sites are invaluable, and we really, really appreciate people coming out. And we're going to be following up via email with a recording of this and some more information about what the three of us do. And feel free to add me on LinkedIn as well. We're really, really excited you guys came. Thanks so much.
Amazing. Likewise. Thank you, guys.
See everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
I also saw that a few people left here or joined here at the end. If you would like, a recording of this, maybe you thought it was an hour earlier, feel free to message me on LinkedIn, and I'll send over a publicly available recording. Thanks so much, guys. I'm going to end the meeting now.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Cheers.